Hello, my sweet little seventh graders. Welcome to another episode of Videos with Mrs. Vian. Today we're going to be reviewing subjective summaries. So yesterday we focused on objective summaries. Today we're going to shift over to subjective summaries. So, how do I identify subjective writing? Well, first I have to remember what subjective writing is. So, a subjective text uses facts to express the author's opinion on a topic, which means it only discusses one side of the topic. And since it only discusses one side of the topic, it's very easy for the reader to understand what side the author is on. Let's come over here. So subjective texts uses emotive vocabulary in the text. Remember, we talked about this yesterday with objective writing. Anything that has emotive vocabulary or any sort of emotion is the author's way of trying to get you as the reader to understand their opinion on the topic. And I think it's also used as a persuasive technique where they are using their emotions to hopefully lure you over to their side. Next, a subjective text directly talks to the reader. So in subjective writing, remember, since they are talking about one side of a topic, and since they are using emotion, the author is going to try to speak directly to you so that it feels more personal. Subjective text also appeals to the reader's emotions by using rhetorical questions. If you don't know what a rhetorical question is, it's a question that is asked in order to create a dramatic effect. For example, a rhetorical question could be, how could we let this happen? Or how did I not see that coming? So how can I change an objective statement into a subjective statement? Well, I created an example for you based off of the central idea of the sinking of the Titanic. So how did the Titanic sink? Okay, so my objective summary is over here on the left-hand side. My subjective summary is on the right-hand side. Remember from yesterday that an objective summary just includes facts and it addresses both sides of the topic. So I'm going to be discussing two different sides of the sinking of the Titanic. You're not going to know my opinion in my objective statement. All right, in 1912, the Titanic was the largest and most luxurious ship to set sail on the Atlantic Ocean. Captain Smith had the opportunity to stand behind the wheel of the Ship of Dreams. In the early morning of April 15th, 1912, the Titanic met its fate. Some believe that the tragedy was caused by the moonless night, but others believe that it was caused by Captain Smith's dismissive responses to the numerous iceberg warnings. So you know what my topic is. I'm discussing how the Titanic sank, what really caused it to sink. You don't know my opinion, but you do know the two sides that I address. And the first side is that it was because of the moonless night. The second one was because Captain Smith dismissed all of the iceberg warnings that he received. My subjective statement, I'm going to incorporate the things that we talked about today in subjective writing. So I'm going to include, I'm going to only address one side of how the Titanic sank. I'm going to use emotive vocabulary. I'm going to directly talk to the reader, and I'm going to ask rhetorical questions. So my subjective statement, when the Titanic set sail in 1912, Captain Edward Smith directed over 2,000 passengers to their deaths while traveling from Southampton to New York City on the Ship of Dreams. Due to his dismissive response to the iceberg warnings, the unsinkable ship tragically crashed. Captain Smith is solely responsible for the deaths of approximately 1,500 people. How could someone be so careless with thousands of innocent lives? I will never be able to understand Captain Smith's blatant disregard for human life. So my subjective statement, I think it's very obvious that the one side I chose is that Captain Smith is the one who caused the Titanic to crash because he dismissed all of the iceberg warnings. Some emotive vocabulary that I used, I have directed over 2,000 passengers to their deaths. When you direct somebody, you just kind of tell them what to do or steer them in that direction. I have due to his dismissive response. So dismissive is seen as a negative thing. You just kind of like brush it off and you ignore it. I have tragically crashed. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Solely responsible, meaning that it was only Captain Smith's fault and nobody else's responsibility, or that nobody else was responsible for all of those deaths. And then I have blatant disregard for human lives. So that's kind of saying that like Captain Smith wasn't even concerned about the human life. So in my response, I have informal writing because I use first person. Remember that subjective statements, you can use first or second person to kind of draw the reader's attention. But in objective writing, you cannot use first or second person. So my example is the last sentence. I will never be able to understand Captain Smith's blatant disregard for human lives. And then I have a rhetorical question, which is, how could someone be so careless with thousands of innocent lives? And I think it's very obvious that I have a lot of facts throughout here. I told you when it set sail, how many people were on it, that it was called the Ship of Dreams, where it docked from, where it was going to, how many people died. So I included my opinion as well as facts to create a subjective statement. So that is how I turned an objective statement into a subjective statement using the exact same topic. And that is what you're going to have to do today. All right, here is a very short example. This is the same topic as the passage from yesterday. Remember, it was called, Will the Airplane Proposal Take Off? So this is an example of a subjective passage. And I have color coded down here. These are the 4 things that we talked about today that subjective writing includes. So I color coded them based off of the passage from today. So, how much is the new airport going to cost you? So that directly talks to the reader. It has second person pronoun, you. It also appeals to the reader's emotions by using rhetorical questions. Hundreds of homeowners will lose their properties. Whole villages will be destroyed by the developer's demolition ball. Countless fields of fertile farmland are to be concreted over, and sadly, our 13th century church is to be demolished. So those 3 sentences show that we're only discussing one side of the topic, and obviously from the events that they're discussing, they do not want the airport to be built. And they're using emotive vocabulary. They have destroyed, concreted, sadly, demolished, and we have tranquil down here, which we haven't gotten to yet. Are we expected to just sit back and watch them tear down our heritage? So they're directly talking to the reader. We have your first person pronoun, we. And it's a rhetorical question. Do we really want the noise and pollution of a busy airport to replace our tranquil existence? So once again, they're talking to the reader, first person, and we have a rhetorical question. Stop this madness in its tracks. Vote no to the airport. So I think it's very obvious what the author's stance is on this topic. They do not want the airport to be built. All right. How will I apply this information? So you are going to reread your nonfiction text titled Comic Book Genius Stan Lee Spider-Man Creator Dies at 95 in Google Classroom. You will use the text and your objective summary from yesterday to compose your own subjective summary of the text. You can use this Google slide as a resource when completing your assignment in Google Classroom. If you have any questions, you know where to find us. Bye, guys.